Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on mathematics workgroups. Just a little housekeeping this morning before we get started. Please mute your lines so we don't have interference during our call. And at the end of today's webinar, we will provide an opportunity for Q&A. Today's webinar will be recorded and should last about an hour so we can share information with individuals who are unable to attend today's meeting. And the slides will always also be presented and shared with everyone after the conclusion of today's webinar. We'll go ahead and get started this morning.
Okay, so I have video.
And audio right now.
Okay, so I'm just waiting. How come I don't hear anybody?
Can we go ahead and mute our phones? So today's speakers are myself, Naomi Sleep, the Executive Director of the Student Success Center, Eric Godin, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Analytics, and Carrie Henderson, the Executive Vice Chancellor. So the Florida Student Success Center was launched earlier this year in partnership with Jobs for the Future, CEOs Education Foundation, and the Florida College System Foundation. Our role is to support institutional initiatives that improve college completion and promote student success. The vision of the Florida Student Success Center is to serve as a resource of evidence-based, innovative practices, and timely information for colleges to really support our colleges and advance best practices. Student Success Centers are statewide organizations that support colleges' efforts to develop student-centered pathways and increase student completion rates. Centers help colleges align priorities, integrate student success efforts, maximize resources to really help initiatives move beyond pilot scale, and to present a collective voice of practitioners in policy discussions. By establishing a Student Success Center, Florida joins a national network of 15 states to learn from others on best practices and peer collaboration. Florida Student Success Center supports our colleges through 5 key pillars: providing coherence, connecting policy and practice, efforts to convene, improving data capacity, and promoting research and knowledge development. The mathematics work groups that we'll be talking about today are part of our convening pillar by establishing purpose-driven work groups on a key topic, in this case mathematics, to dive into policy and practice. At this time, I'll turn it over to Eric Godin to talk about what mathematics pathways and student success in the Florida college system.
Thanks, Naomi. So we're going to talk a little bit about the initial kind of exploratory research that helped us get to where we are right now, which is utilizing the representatives from the colleges to really help us think through this math work. So just to give a kind of background here about why math is so important and some of the data, when you look at the different types of pathways for math, we've grouped them into 3 buckets of developmental education courses, prereq pass rates, and gateway pass rates. And just to give you a sense at the state level kind of how we're doing, when you look at pass rates in developmental education courses, over the last 3 years, we have increased from about 52% to 59%. For prereq, which is considered Math 1033, we also have Math 1100 and a stats course that's utilized, although not as much as Math 1033. We've increased pass rates, certainly in intermediate algebra of Math 1033 from about 54% to 57%. And the other 2 have slightly decreased. And I think kind of one of the important pieces to think about here is that, on the whole, barely more than half of our students are passing intermediate algebra. And that's something that is consistent with national research, not just happening in Florida. And that's something that you'll see when I talk about more of the research, is that what we're finding is not just specific to Florida. This is happening at a national stage. And we've had experts from the data center and the Community College Research Center come and talk to the state about this to help provide evidence for this information. So the final piece here for the Gateway Math pass rate, if you look specifically at Math 1105, we've increased from 62% to 64% over the last 3 years. And so this was one of the first pieces of information that we gathered. A second piece was really an internal exploratory analysis. And what we did was we took a cohort of first-time in college students in the fall of 2014 who were enrolled in associates in arts degrees. And we realized that this is, when we look at first-time, full-time, it's not all of the students that would be enrolled in your institution, but it is a good snapshot at those students who we feel would be most successful. So basically what we did was we said, all right, what of the number of students that are first-time, full-time in fall of 2014, and of those that took a math class their first semester, what happened to them within 3 years? And so that's what this chart here shows. And really we're looking at for the students here that started in developmental ed. And I think this shows a really good picture that over a 3-year period, for those students whose first math course was Dev Ed, only 72% of those students made it out of Dev Ed. 40% of those students passed a prereq math course within those 3 years. Only a third of the students passed one math gateway course, and only 14% of those students graduated within 150%. So, of course, the more math courses you add, the longer it takes. This is just one of the pieces that helped us to illustrate math being a barrier to success. And so from this, we were able to partner with the Center for Post-Secondary Success at Florida State University and ask them to do a more rigorous statistical analysis for us to really see what happens with students and their math pathways, and most specifically, what is the impact of taking Math 1033 on a student's success in Math 1105. One of the things we do want to note is that when we did present this information initially at the math convening earlier this year, we had gotten information from the Common Core numbering system. We've learned now that that was incorrect. What we had assumed from the first analysis was that not all of the colleges had required Math 1033 before Math 1105. We're now aware that actually all colleges are considering Math 1033 as a prerequisite. So we have redone the analysis, and we'll have that available. In fact, when we share the slide, you can see that the link here goes to it. But the important piece is that we found the same results, that regardless of if the college, required it or not, as we had first thought, the final results and conclusions that the Center for Post-Secondary Success found were consistent. So just to give you a sample of the students that were included, we were looking at fall 2014 Associates in Arts students. The Center for Post-Secondary Success was able to use some of the data that they had already been utilizing for a study on developmental education. So that was certainly great. And to give you a sense of where students fell, because we wanted to be able to identify if students started in Dev Ed, if they enrolled directly into Math 1033, or if they went into college algebra. About 11% enrolled in developmental education, 52% of the sample enrolled directly into intermediate algebra, and 36% enrolled directly into college algebra. So just kind of an overview of the main findings, and I'll go into one or two specifics in a second, is that one of the pieces that's, I think, critically important to our work that we don't go into here is really looking at when students take math, not just if they take it, but when. And so nearly 1/5 of students did not enroll in math at any time during the first 3 years in college. And when they did enroll, they were likely to take one math in the fall and then never enroll again. So this is certainly a piece that that we need to understand more. And hopefully, as we talk about the math work groups later, understanding a student's pathway from high school will help us understand this. But the big takeaway from all this research is that we really did find no evidence that taking Math 1033 as a prereq increased the student's likelihood of passing college algebra, which is the gateway course. In some cases, it actually led to a decrease in a student's likelihood to pass the course. And this, again, as I said, is research that is consistent with findings at the national level. So just to give you a sense of kind of the numbers behind this, if we looked at the predicted probability of passing college algebra based on where a student initially enrolled, for all students in this sample, without taking a prereq, they were 62% likely, or that's their probability of passing college algebra. When you look at, for those students that enrolled in intermediate algebra, the likelihood of passing college algebra was only 41, was only about 41 or 42%. So in this case, it was a lower likelihood. Now, even when we look at the success of students in college algebra, when they pass intermediate algebra, we still find the same results, that even if a student passes intermediate algebra, they're still less likely to pass college algebra than those students who enrolled directly in. One piece of the findings is that for students that took DevEd and then took Math 1033, they were about equally as likely to pass college algebra. And then, although we don't have 3 years of data just because of the data set we were looking at, we were able to see, all right, within 2 years, what percentage of students were able to earn a college degree, and about 8% did, compared to, 8% of the students that enrolled in college algebra without enrolling in intermediate algebra compared to under 5% for those students that started in intermediate algebra.
Great. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the mathematics work groups. So Naomi and Eric have done a good job framing the conversation around the Student Success Center, and in the first year, one of our primary focuses will be on mathematics. That's not to say that math will be the only focus for the Student Success Center and our work moving forward, but we know and through the research shows that this can pose a critical barrier for student success. And so as we think about the work moving forward, we would like to engage representatives from our colleges in the Florida college system, as well as our partners in K-12 and the state university system around mathematics. And I'll talk a little bit about what the structure is for the mathematics work groups, as well as what our plans are moving forward over the next year. And so in thinking about what the charge of these work groups will be, we are looking for these individuals to explore complex issues surrounding mathematics pathways, not only to prepare high school students for transition into the Florida college system. We also want to focus on our own student success along math pathways, and whether that be algebra or a non-algebra based
pathway, that's something that's important for us to explore. We are also interested in exploring how the mathematics pathways align between the Florida college system institutions and the state university system institutions. And so we're really looking at this holistically, understanding that each of our systems have a responsibility to prepare students and to ensure consistency in content and alignment to the extent that we can. And so when we think about the work groups, knowing that they are going to be comprised of faculty members as well as administrators, department chairs from our colleges, we established these guiding values to really lead the work and serve as a framework for our efforts moving forward. So transparency is key to the work. Collaboration, obviously, is inherent in it. Having respect, ensuring diversity, and exploring evidence-based inquiry. And so everything that we're doing is really designed to be research-based, be collaborative, and to be transparent about the work and what the data and what the policies show. And so those values will be used as the work groups moving forward. So the next piece is the deliverables. So what will actually come out of the work groups? We see really two deliverables from each of the work groups. One is to catalog evidence-based best practices designed for scale, and these could be best practices at an institutional level, at a district level, through partnerships and articulation, but really what does the evidence show as efforts that can really promote that alignment and content alignment with mathematics pathways. And the second deliverable is recommendations for state policy, institutional policy, and practice around mathematics redesign. And so we anticipate that each of the work groups that we'll now go into a little more detail on would produce these two deliverables. So evidence-based best practices and then recommendations for policy, both at the state and the institutional level. So I talked a little bit about kind of the three areas that we want to focus on. And so naturally, we think this work aligns to three separate work groups. The thing I will note about these, while the work groups are separate, all of these things relate to each other. And so we don't anticipate that the work of each work group will happen in isolation. Rather, we expect that there will be opportunities for the work groups to engage with each other because we know that these work groups are all interconnected. And so we have high school to college alignment as the first work group, SCS mathematics sequences is the second, and SCS to university alignment is the third. And so when we think about the high school to college alignment work group, what we really want to explore is how high school curriculum in mathematics aligns with post-secondary expectations. And some of the bullets you'll see on your screen are kind of preliminary conversations and things that may guide the work. This is very much, as we said, a collaborative process, and so this will help provide a framework, but by no means is exhaustive. As we go through the process of forming the work groups, we would encourage them to ask their own research questions that may or may not be represented here. But generally, we're looking at clarifying what those college entrance requirements are and how they align with high school assessments and courses. As we said earlier, evidence-based is really what we're focused on, and so we will be examining longitudinal data on mathematics sequencing and student success rates. We also want to engage our high school and K-12 partners with our faculty to dialogue about post-secondary education, and then lastly, identifying strategies that would promote greater alignment both at the state and at the local level. The second work group is the Florida College System Mathematics Sequences, and the purpose of this work group is to examine the pathways that may exist for students as they enter our system and our institutions based on what their programs of study are. So we would be interested in having this work group explore algebra versus non-algebra pathways for students. Does algebra make sense for every program of study, or is there a statistics option that may be more appropriate depending on what the student's intended transfer major is? So in addition to exploring those pathways, we would also anticipate that this work group will focus on redesign of course structures to maximize support for our students. And so this may include identifying course and institutional structures that promote or deter success of students, looking at modernizing mathematics content, again, reviewing data, and we've done some preliminary work here. There's still more work to be done on student success and different pathways, and then lastly, identifying a sequence of courses in the context of what a student intends to study. And then the third work group, Florida College System to University Alignment, would examine how the curriculum in our colleges in mathematics aligns with university expectations, particularly for students and programs that are intended to transfer. And so here, this group would examine university mathematics requirements for alignment with Florida College System. Again, we would be looking at data in partnership with the Board of Governors to see what happens to our students once they transfer into the university system, how they perform, engaging our Florida College System and state university system faculty in a dialogue about what those expectations are, and then lastly, identify strategies that promote greater alignment. And so when we look at these work groups, the one thing we do want to clarify is that this work may have already happened or is happening in pockets around our state. And so we know that there are associations as well as committees that are looking at doing this work. And so to the extent possible, we do not want to be duplicative of work that already exists. We want to recognize and honor the work that has come before us. And so as we think about structuring these work groups, that is in front of mind so that we can go ahead and capitalize on all of the work that has taken place so far. So in terms of the activities and timeline for the work to take place, so we are looking really to begin this work in September, and for the participants of the work groups, we would have a one-day kickoff meeting where those work groups would be presented with data that we've collected on some of the research questions that we've had, as well as an analysis of policy at the state level and perhaps the national level to begin the work. And so that one-day conference would be really kind of bringing all the work groups together and making the charge clear so that they could begin their work in earnest. And so the work would take place throughout the 18-19 academic year, and beginning in September, we anticipate phase one would begin. And phase one is where these work groups would review the research that we've developed, develop original research questions, and then also, to the extent that we can fulfill those requests, work with the Division of Florida Colleges and Florida Student Success Center staff to answer any research questions or provide data that wasn't already made available. So this really is an exploratory process where we want the groups to come up with these questions and to review the data that we've prepared. Phase two would be conducting a scan of the policy environment, both at the state and the local level. Again, to the extent that we have information, we'll provide it from the state perspective, but this would also be an exploratory phase where members of the work group would be able to do this work on their own and bring it back to their respective work groups to talk about the work that's happening as it relates to high school to college alignment, math sequences within institutions, as well as college to university alignment. The third phase is really where the deliverables would take place. So you'll recall that we identified two deliverables. One is a catalog of evidence-based best practices around mathematics redesign. And the second is to develop policy recommendations at the state and local level. And so we anticipate that in this phase, the work groups would reflect on the information collected in the first two phases and generate those recommendations that could then be shared in the last phase, which is really going to culminate in a one-day institute. We are being very aggressive with our timeline and hoping that that will happen in June or July of next year. But in addition to having this one-day institute where we invite representatives from our colleges as well as our K-12 and university partners, we would hope that this work would continue beyond that one-day institute and be able to be presented at national convenings as well as around the state to groups who may not be able to attend. So you can see across the bottom what we anticipate the timeline would be. We are shooting for that September start date, as I mentioned, as well as a June and July completion date. And the work groups will really work together to determine what that work looks like in between. And so there's a lot of flexibility there. So in terms of the participants of the work groups, we are hopeful that the participants would share their expertise, skills, and insight with this statewide networks of mathematics experts that we're pulling together. Participants would also receive opportunities for professional development and networking to increase our understanding of the state of alignment of mathematics, as well as that evidence-based best practices in state policy. I'll talk a little bit now about the roles and the resources that these work groups will have. So as I said, we have prepared 3 different work groups, and we anticipate that each work group will be staffed by a Department of Education staff member who will connect the work groups with technical assistance, document the work through minutes, work directly with the chairperson to schedule meetings, and really just serve as a resource to these work groups as they're doing the work. We would like for each work group to be chaired by a college faculty member who will really work with the liaison and the members of the work group to conduct and complete the work. We anticipate that each work group will have about 12 members, hopefully composed of faculty and department chairs, as well as our K-12 and university partners for those 2 work groups. What I will say here is we've already gotten a tremendous interest in the work, and because we want the work groups to really move forward in a timely way, we do have to limit the membership to 12, and I think as of now we have close to 70 folks who are interested in being involved. And so what we plan to do as we work with chief instructional affairs officers to make the selections is we would like to create a larger group that will receive updates from the work groups and have the opportunity to provide regular feedback. And so as the work groups receive the research, as they receive the policy scan, we would anticipate that we would have some sort of newsletter or regular webinar so that the work is being shared throughout the process. Because this is designed to be transparent and collaborative as our guiding values, we really want to ensure that folks feel informed along the way and have the opportunity to contribute. The last resource that will be available to work groups would be subject matter experts who would provide some of the research and policy background to inform the work groups, really in phases 1 to 2, but we certainly would hope if work groups desired to have them in later phases, we would engage with them as well. So we're really trying to be strategic with how we're staffing the work groups and providing resources so that the work groups have enough information to hit the ground running in September following our kickoff. So if you're interested in serving as a work group member, we have established this timeline. We've talked already about the 1-day in-person orientation and then the work that would take place between September and May. We anticipate there would be once a month virtual meetings through webinar technology where the work group members would be able to collaborate. The June 2019 is the anticipated 1-day Institute Day. And then on a monthly basis, we would expect work group members to engage in readings, research, and other related activities as determined by the work group chair. And we anticipate that that will be about 6 to 8 hours per month. And so that's something to know, and we recognize that many schedules are already set and individuals may have other obligations. So for those who aren't able to participate as members of work groups, we would provide opportunities, like we said, for that feedback and that engagement along the way. So in terms of our next steps, we have developed and disseminated an interest survey. It's on your screen there, and then you should have received it via email. If not, we will send it up following this webinar when we send out all the materials. What this interest survey does is ask folks from the institutional level to indicate if they're interested in serving on a work group, as well as, based on their areas of expertise, what work groups they would be assigned to. And we will be working in partnership with the Chief Instructional Affairs Officers in making those work group selections, and would be looking to do that in the summer, preferably sooner rather than later. Again, we recognize that summer is a time many faculty have off, and September definitely is busy. Our kickoff meeting, as we said, would be in September, but we would provide those ongoing opportunities for engagement and updates. And so for the folks who aren't able to participate, we would allow them the chance to participate as much as they can. And so that's a little bit about what the work groups are doing and what they're planned on doing. And so we are certainly open to feedback and guidance from the folks who are mathematicians and have done this work already at the local level. So we will keep everybody posted on the work groups, and I'm going to turn it back over to Naomi to walk through a little bit of the resources that are publicly available on our website.
Thanks, Carrie. So earlier this week, we launched the Student Success Center website with some resources that Carrie mentioned, specifically related to mathematics and some of the information that was shared today. So I wanted to make sure you all knew where you could find that information. So at the Florida College System website, you'll see at www.floridacollegesystem.com. At the top in the blue banner, there is the Success Center tab. Underneath there, there's a Guided Pathways resources. Underneath the Guided Pathways resources, you will find information specifically related to mathematics pathways. The information Eric shared today about the research from the Center for Post-Secondary Success is located there, as well as information about our mathematics work groups that Carrie has shared today, and then information from the Dana Center on Mathematics Implementation Guide and other resources. So we hope that you find that information helpful, and we do intend on keeping the website up to date with information as more resources become available. So I think at this time we wanted to go ahead and open it up for questions and answers. So I think I'll start with some information that we might have had potentially in the chat inbox first to see if there's any questions. And if not, then we'll probably just go ahead and make sure that we open up some of the audio so that you all can engage in some Q&A with us. I think we had a little bit of interference, so I'm going to try that again and see if we can connect with you all for some questions today about our webinar. Okay, I think what we'll go ahead and do is maybe if we can use the chat inbox for some questions, and I'll go ahead and use the audio. So I think we have a question about if we're going to be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint from today's webinar. And I wanted to make sure everybody was aware that, as Carrie indicated, we will follow up from today's webinar with all the material that was shared, as well as a link to the survey that Carrie mentioned, gauging your interest in participating in our math work groups. So we will be following up with the information that was shared today. I think we're going to have a question related to some of the data that was shared today.
Yes, so the data that were shared were from full-time, first-time in college students, and that would also include students who were in that group that may have been taking online classes as well.
We also received a question indicating whether or not the DevEd success rates have gotten worse since the legislature allowed for shorter classes. I'm assuming this is a compressed class schedule. This is certainly something as citizens you are welcome to write your legislators to as well as talk to your local lobbyists. And then think about institutionally how you might want to offer those courses in a way that would promote success.
So there's another question now on some of the data, and we have an executive summary of the analysis that was done, and that is available on the website.
We also received a question about if there is an opportunity to provide additional information just beyond the information that was asked in the survey about mathematics workgroup participation. If we could request that information and use in the selection of workgroup members, and we would certainly welcome that information. At a state level, we obviously don't have access to the institutional information, and we'll rely on instructional affairs officers for that. But to the extent that you have information you would like to share about your background as you're making your selection for which work group you'd like to participate in, feel free to send that to Naomi, and you should have her email when we send out this PowerPoint. We also received a question as if completing the survey is all that is needed to express interest in the work group, and the answer is yes. We also received a question about whether or not university faculty will be involved in the process. The answer to that is yes. In addition to the high school to college alignment where we'll have K-12 representation, we will also have representation from our university partners in that third work group.
So then there's a question, I assume this relates to the data. How have you analyzed the GPA of students? We did control for academic ability, so GPA was, I believe, one of the measures that we used, as well as courses that students would have taken in high school to get a fair comparison.
If anybody has any additional questions, you can go ahead and write that into the chat box at this time. I think we've kind of answered all the questions that have come in to this point. We received one question about whether or not there's an opportunity to examine programs at a university level to determine if the required mathematics course is linked to program outcomes. Certainly, we would be interested in that, particularly as part of our third work group. And I am aware that there is a work group that already is meeting that includes both Florida college system and university faculty as well, who are doing some of that work. But certainly as we think about alignment and articulation, program outcomes, particularly as we think about mathematics sequencing, is of the utmost importance.
And then there was one question about those students that took Math 1033, and while it is a requirement at the colleges, students can test out of it. And the question kind of relates to one of the tables that success rates seem to be similar. We'll have the slides available, but for the most part, the differences were statistically significant. So I encourage you to take a look at the table when we make the slides available.
If you completed the survey already regarding interest in the work group, that's all you need to do. You don't need to complete it again. Again, for those of you who are interested in providing your information, that survey closes on the 19th. Even if you aren't interested necessarily in serving as a work group member, if you complete that survey, you will be added to a mailing list where we will be providing updates regarding the work as we move forward.
So a question for students that took Math, that took 1033 and 1105, did you control when they took it? So I do not believe we did as far as when they took it, but that's certainly something that we can look at in the future.
We also received a question regarding changing the perspective of college algebra content from less computational and more data analysis and graphical understanding. That's not something at the state level that we would prescribe, but that is something we would hope that the work groups would consider as they think about aligning content with outcomes. So I think certainly it's on the table if the work group chooses to go there. High school instructors will be involved in this discussion. We anticipate that we will have representatives both from the Department of Education, Public Schools Division, as well as local high school instructors who will contribute to the discussion.
Okay, I think that's kind of all the questions we received. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar. On behalf of the Florida College System and the Florida Student Success Center, we appreciate your attention today. As we said, we will follow up with the material that was shared today, and then also the survey link for you all to express your interest in participating in our mathematics work groups. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.